Alright, so another way that we can do the same thing as kind of drag out here and pick is we can just create something by right-clicking and then drag it into one of those node slots. So let's say we're going to use a fall-off map again. We'll just right-click and create a fall-off map. And I'm actually going to hide both the material browser and the navigator there, and I'll just zoom in. And right here, I'm going to drag that fall-off map into the diffuse. And I'll just move this up here and then pan. And you can see that we get a good preview here. To expand this preview, I'm going to double click on it. And then we'll double click on this to change the color around. So if we wanted some sort of kind of interesting sheened painted color or something like that, then we could get that out of that fall off map. And one thing that you'll notice if we just hide this and kind of zoom out a bit is that we're getting the controllers for each one of these. So when I go here, you can see that we have these two Bezier controllers, and those will show up for your maps. If we just double click on this map material itself and we go into maps, you can see these are equating to the values that are over here. So if I start adjusting this, it's just between 0 and 1 instead of between 0 and 100. So we can adjust those there. Now when you first start off, you may or may not want to see these or have a use for these. There's two different ways that you can kind of do this. One is if you go to Options and Preferences, you can ask it not to show any additional parameters, which is kind of a global way of saying that you only really want to work with these maps here. Another way to do this is to right-click on any one of these rollouts and just say Hide Child Trees, and then those will be hidden. Lastly, if we just go into additional parameters, we can right-click on anywhere that's kind of blank here, and this will give us this big rollout, and we can go into Hide All. So let me actually just right-click up here so we can get the whole rollout. And under Show Hide Slots, we can go to Additional Parameters, Maps, and then we can say Show All or Hide All. And what that'll do is instead of hiding them one by one, it'll hide them continuously. So if you see, what we did was we just right-clicked and said, hide child trees. And if I go in and let's just drag out a glossiness, and for the glossiness, I'll just use cellular. You see that we'll get that cellular because we really just hid what was currently there. If we do what I just explained and go to hide slots, additional parameters, and say under maps, we want to hide all, then what we'll do is it will hide all of those maps. So we can just select on these controllers because we don't need them anymore, and I'll press delete. And we'll just click and drag to disconnect that one, and we'll add a luminosity. So now if I add a luminosity map, which is this noise, you can see that that won't pipe out. And that's usually the way that I like to work, is to because then I still get the additional parameters options, and I don't have all those additional maps. And if I need to drag out a map, I can do that some other time. So that's a little bit about navigating using the additional parameters. Next, we'll take a look at actually using more of these additional parameters instead of going out to the parameter editor as much. So to do that, what I'm going to do is we'll just re-render this to kind of take a look at how our teapot looks here. And you can see I want to edit these noise parameters. I'm going to press P to get rid of that parameter editor and then go into additional parameters. And you can see we have things like our noise colors and our noise size. We can use this spinner and just drag down to bring that noise size down. And when we render this out again, we'll see that noise size start to come down. I can also double click here on any value and I can say, you know what, I think I want this to be 0.5, and we'll render that out. And also if I wanted to adjust things like the low threshold to make this a little bit more dark and contrasting, as well as the high threshold will make it a little more contrasting. Now we're starting to introduce like little flakes in here, so I think I'll just kind of adjust that down so we don't have quite as many of those. And if for some reason we are off to the side and kind of playing with a lot of different materials here, and we can't see that slot, or you just want it to be bigger, you can always right click and you can say open preview window, and you can set that preview window anywhere you want. You can also make it a bit bigger. So if we were playing with this and we were over here, you could always go in and adjust the noise size or something like that and keep that preview window up, which is pretty handy. You can also dock this preview window. You may want to dock it down here and have a whole set of different preview windows up. So let's just say we had this noise pattern. We might make a preview for that, and we could dock that in here. I'll just pop it to the side, and then we'd have that there, so we can kind of see which ones we want. And if we want to get rid of these, we can just close them off really easily, and that gives us some options to see previews for our materials as well as our maps. So now I'm able to really adjust a lot of these parameters. If I wanted to take this, and maybe that was a kind of orange fleck color that's in there instead of the white little flecks, then I could adjust that, and I already made this much bigger, so we'll go with 0.3 and render that out. And you can see we're starting to get what we might want out of that material. And for the most part, I've not had to use too much of the parameter editor here. So we can, close this out and just kind of use these additional parameters. You can also see I haven't had to use much over here of the material map browser. So I may just press O to get that. And that puts us in a much better situation where we're working with just the kind of schematic view here. And we don't have to work, I guess, as hard in order to, have, or we don't have to be as restricted in the space that we are. We can always pop back those windows when we need to. So I can go in and just kind of minimize this. Now, organizing these nodes and moving them around can, be a big problem, and that's something that you definitely want to learn how to do. There's a couple buttons up here that will kind of help us, and you can see my Move Children is toggled on. Yours may be on or off, and that helps us to move these nodes around as one piece. So if you have Move Children on, and I select this, anything that's after it will get moved with it, which is really pretty helpful. If that's off, then you'll just be moving each node individually. So you may want to toggle that on or off as you're working. And the other thing that you can do is as you start pulling these out, you may inevitably get all these nodes everywhere. You can kind of just auto lay out these nodes by pressing the hotkey L, and that will kind of lay them all out individually. So you can kind of move them there, and it'll kind of spread their hierarchies out as well. So I can kind of take these, and if this was a little bit smaller, I can press L, and you can see that that would center around there. Now that hotkey option is also present in the toolbar. We have Layout All, which will lay out the entire view, and Layout Children, which will just lay out the children of whatever it is that you have selected. So if we go over here and we have this node selected, we can just click on Layout Children, and it will just work for those. So if for instance we had these assorted the way that we wanted them to be, then we probably just use that Layout Children. And it's also moves up the hierarchy. So if we have these guys here, we just have that selected, we can say Layout Children to kind of move that into place. And if we have Move All Children, we can move that up there. That also has a hotkey, and those are also present in this menu. So we have Layout All and Layout Children. So I'll use C quite a bit, and actually L when needed, in order to lay out the views really quickly, because they become very cumbersome when you start adding in more and more, and I think that is really very helpful. Now there's only a couple other buttons we haven't looked at in this toolbar, and that is our Show Map in Viewport and Show Background in Preview, and we should be pretty familiar with both of those. Now one thing that we may not be used to is actually being able to see a lot of these maps in our preview the way that they would render. And that's something that 2011 brings to the table quite well. So if I just go and say Show Map in Viewport, what will happen is we can start to see the way that this map may look when it's rendered. And this particular one for the fall off map isn't one that will actually show up. There's a few of them, that do and a few of them that don't. One of them is definitely the noise. So if we go in and we say that we want to see that noise in the viewport, previously we weren't really able to see what the actual noise would look like. It would always map to a UVW space and not really show us the actual size. But if you can see here, when I render this out, and what we'll do is we'll just take this, and I'm going to take that noise directly and pipe it into the diffuse. And that way when we render it out, you'll see that noise is pretty much the exact same size and look as we have in the viewport, which is really pretty helpful. So you can adjust those and be able to see those in the viewport, and you can also see them hardware shaded. When we bring up our character and start piping materials into that, we'll really see where that makes a big difference. So I'm going to take this and just kind of disconnect it from there so that we get back what we wanted and bring our diffuse color back in, and then we can kind of see how that's going to look on our teapot. So the next thing I want to look at is just adding in some of these controllers. So I'm going to go into additional parameters. And you can see that we have a lot of values like the reflect amount and reflection color, luminosity, and things of that nature. And a lot of these we can adjust with an actual controller. So if I go in here and let's just go and choose our glossiness, and let's pipe that up to any, you can see that we can get all these different controllers. We can have a float list and linear and scripts and all the rest of that, but we'll just choose our noise because that'll give us a quick understanding of how that might work. And then when we go up, this is a good place to do the preview. So I'm just going to right click and say open preview, and I'm going to just dock that at the bottom. So now when I'm working with this controller here, you can see that I have my noise float controller, which has the noise strength as a Bezier controller, and the default value is 5, and that's going to be piped in here, which is then going into my glossiness. If I play this back, you can see in the viewport what will happen, and if I just scrub this, you can see the update on the preview. So what this is doing is just adjusting that glossiness based on the noise controller. So this is something that you can easily do in the regular interface of Max, but it's really nice to be able to see this particular setup and be able to look at how those controllers are laid out in the view. We also have access to things like these colors, so if we just want to go and grab like the luminosity color, we can bring out like a Bezier color controller, and we can control that color there. So we can start to put in any sort of values here that you wanted to adjust with a controller. So whether it's a regular Max controller, a script controller, or anything like that, you can kind of pipe these into these values, and then we can just kind of close that up and minimize these, and we'll just press C to organize that there, and I'm just going to pop this out of here so that we've kind of organized our view. So now we have this kind of noise controller controlling the glossiness. We have a color controller that is controlling the luminosity channel, and some of these other maps that are controlling are just diffuse and everything, which is pretty easy to see in our schematic view. So the next thing we're going to do is bring our character in here and see how those materials are set up on him.